Hi, grade fours. Here we go with another episode of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Last time I read to you Hermione and Ron. Well, Hermione anyway was talking to Moaning Myrtle. Peeves, of course, was trying to create trouble, and well, he does a good job of that. That's sort of what he's good at, right? Is making trouble. So, Miss Granger was just talking about you, said Peeves slyly in Myrtle's ear. Just saying, how nice you look tonight, said Hermione, glaring at Peeves. Myrtle eyed Hermione suspiciously. You're making fun of me, she said, silver tears welling rapidly in her small, see-through eyes. No, honestly, didn't I just say how nice Myrtle's looking? Said Hermione, nudging Ron and Harry painfully in the ribs. Oh, yeah, she did. Don't lie to me, Myrtle gasped, tears now flooding down her face while Peeves chuckled happily over her shoulder. Do you think I don't know what people call me behind my back? Fat Myrtle, ugly Myrtle, miserable, moaning, moping Myrtle. You've missed out Spotty, Peeves hissed in her ear. Moaning Myrtle burst into anguished sobs and fled from the dungeon. Peeves shot after her, pelting her with moldy peanuts, yelling, Spotty! Spotty! Oh dear, said Hermione sadly. Nearly Headless Nick now drifted towards them through the crowd. Enjoying yourselves? Oh, yes. They lied. Not a bad turnout, said Nearly Headless Nick proudly. The Wailing Widow came all the way up from Kent. It's nearly time for my speech. I'd better go and warn the orchestra. The orchestra, however, stopped playing at that very moment. They and everyone else in the dungeon fell silent, looking around in excitement as a hunting horn sounded. Oh, here we go, said Nearly Headless Nick bitterly. Through the dungeon wall burst a dozen ghost horses, each ridden by a headless horseman. The assembly clapped loudly. Harry started to clap too, but stopped quickly at the sight of Nick's face. The horses galloped into the middle of the dance floor and halted, rearing and plunging. A large ghost at the front, whose bearded head was under his arm, blowing the horn, leapt down, lifted his head high in the air so he could see over the crowd. Everyone laughed, and strode over to Nearly Headless Nick, squashing his head back onto his neck. Nick! He roared. How are you? Head still hanging in there? He gave a hearty guffaw and clapped Nearly Headless Nick on the shoulder. Welcome, Patrick, said Nick stiffly, and here's the picture again of the Must Be Patrick from the Headless Hunt. Livens, said Sir Patrick, spotting Harry, Ron, and Hermione and giving a huge fake jump of astonishment so that his head fell off again. The crowd howled with laughter. Very amusing, said Nearly Headless Nick darkly. Don't mind Nick, shouted Sir Patrick's head from the floor. Still upset we won't let him join the hunt. But I mean to say, look at the fellow. Well, I think, said Harry hurriedly at a meaningful look from Nick. Nick's very frightening and Ha! Yelled Sir Patrick's head. Bet he asked you to say that. If I could have everyone's attention, it's time for my speech, said Nearly Headless Nick loudly, striding towards the podium and climbing into an icy blue spotlight. My late lamented lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great sorrow. But nobody heard much more. Sir Patrick and the rest of the Headless Hunt had just started a game of head hockey, and the crowd was turning to watch. Nearly Headless Nick tried vainly to recapture his audience, but gave up as Sir Patrick's head went sailing past him to loud cheers. Harry was very cold by now, not to mention hungry. I can't stand much more of this, Ron muttered, his teeth chattering as the orchestra ground back into action and the ghost swept back onto the dance floor. Let's go, Harry agreed. They backed towards the door, nodding and beaming at everyone who looked at them, and a minute later they were hurrying back up the passageway full of black candles. "Pudding might not be finished yet," said Ron hopefully, leading the way towards the steps to the entrance hall. And then Harry heard it. Rip. Tear. Kill. It was the same voice, the same cold, murderous voice he had heard in Lockhart's office. He stumbled to a halt, clutching at the stone wall, listening with all his might, looking around, squinting up and down the dimly lit passageway. "Harry, what are you—" "It's that voice again. Shut up a minute." "So hungry. For so long." "Listen," said Harry urgently, and Ron and Hermione froze, watching him. "Kill. Time to kill." The voice was growing fainter. Harry was sure it was moving away, moving upwards. A mixture of fear and excitement gripped him as he stared at the dark ceiling. How could it be moving upwards? Was it a phantom, to whom stone ceilings didn't matter? "This way!" he shouted, and he began to run up the stairs into the entrance hall. It was no good hoping to hear anything here. The babble of talk from the Halloween feast was echoing out of the great hall. Harry sprinted up the marble staircase to the first floor, Ron and Hermione clattering after him. "Harry, what are we—" "Shh!" Harry strained his ears. Distantly from the floor above and growing fainter still, he heard the voice. "I smell blood. I smell blood." His stomach lurched. "It's going to kill someone!" he shouted, and ignoring Ron and Hermione's bewildered faces, he ran up the next flight of steps, three at a time, trying to listen over his own pounding footsteps. Harry hurtled around the whole of the second floor, Ron and Hermione panting behind him, not stopping until they turned a corner into the last deserted passage. "Harry, what was that all about?" said Ron, wiping sweat off his face. "I couldn't hear anything." But Hermione gave a sudden gasp, pointing down the corridor. "Look!" Something was shining on the wall ahead. They approached slowly, squinting through the darkness. Foot-high words had been daubed on the wall between two windows, shimmering in the light cast by the flaming torches. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." "What's that thing hanging underneath?" said Ron, a slight quiver in his voice. As they edged nearer, Harry almost slipped over. There was a large puddle of water on the floor. Ron and Hermione grabbed him, and they inched towards the message, eyes fixed on a dark shadow beneath it. All three of them realized what it was at once and leapt backwards with a splash. Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, was hanging by her tail from the torch bracket. She was stiff as a board, her eyes wide and staring. For a few seconds they didn't move. Then Ron said, "Let's get out of here." "Shouldn't we try and help?" Harry began awkwardly. "Trust me," said Ron, "we don't want to be found here." But it was too late. A rumble as though of a distant thunder told them that the feast had just ended. From either end of the corridor where they stood came the sound of hundreds of feet climbing the stairs, and the loud, happy talk of well-fed people. Next moment, students were crashing into the passage from both ends. The chatter, the bustle, the noise died suddenly as the people in front spotted the hanging cat. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood alone in the middle of the corridor as silence fell among the mass of students, pressing forward to see the grisly sight. Then someone shouted through the quiet, "Enemies of the air, beware! You'll be next, mudbloods." It was Draco Malfoy. He had pushed up to the front of the crowd, his cold eyes alive, his usually bloodless face flushed, as he grinned at the sight of the hanging, immobile cat. I'm going to stop there. That's the end of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 is called The Writing on the Wall.